Adam Sandler sees his former teacher living on the street. His attitude will make you cry. The November chill cut through Adam's light jacket as he hurried down Fifth Avenue. New York in autumn had always been his favorite. The crisp air, the golden leaves in Central Park, the city preparing for the holiday season. Today, however, he was running late for a meeting with his production team about an upcoming film project. As he waited at a crosswalk, Adam noticed a small gathering near a bench. Nothing unusual for Manhattan, but something caught his eye. An elderly man sitting with weathered cardboard signs and a few possessions in plastic bags. The man's face was partially obscured by a graying beard, but there was something hauntingly familiar about him. Adam felt the pedestrian signal change, but he didn't move. Instead, he found himself walking toward the bench, drawn by an inexplicable feeling of recognition. As he approached, the man looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. The recognition was immediate and mutual. "Mr. Reynolds?" Adam asked, his voice barely audible above the city noise. The older man's eyes widened slightly. "Adam Sandler," he said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. His voice was raspier than Adam remembered, but unmistakable. Richard Reynolds had been Adam's high school English teacher in Manchester, New Hampshire, the one who had encouraged his performances, who had seen something in him when others had, dismissed his antics as mere class disruption. This was the teacher who had given him Twain and Shakespeare, who had stayed after school to help him work on his first comedy routines. "What are you—" Adam started but couldn't finish the sentence. The question seemed too intrusive, too obvious. "Life takes unexpected turns," Mr. Reynolds said with a slight shrug, his dignity somehow intact despite his circumstances. "Sometimes the plot twists aren't what we anticipate." Adam felt a surge of emotions, shock, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of sadness mixed with guilt. Here was the man who had helped shape his love for storytelling, who had been so instrumental in his journey, now sitting on a street corner with everything he owned in a few bags. "I have to get to a meeting," Adam said, checking his watch out of habit rather than necessity. "But I'd really like to talk more. Can I buy you lunch? Today, after my meeting?" Mr. Reynolds seemed to consider this for a moment, pride battling with practicality. "I'm not in a position to decline hospitality these days," he finally said, with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll be here." As Adam reluctantly continued to his meeting, his mind was no longer on script revisions or casting decisions. It was filled with memories of a classroom from decades ago, and the inexplicable turn of events that had led his mentor to a New York City street corner. Adam couldn't focus during the meeting. While his team discussed camera angles and location and permits, his thoughts kept returning to Mr. Reynolds. He excused himself immediately after they wrapped up, ignoring calls from his agent about another potential project. He found his former teacher exactly where he'd left him. Something about seeing him there, patient and resigned, made Adam's chest tighten. "There's a small diner around the corner," Adam suggested, helping Mr. Reynolds gather his few possessions. "They make a decent sandwich and give you some privacy." The diner was warm and smelled of coffee and grilled cheese. They settled into a booth near the back, away from the windows. Up close, Adam could see the toll the years had taken on his teacher. Deep lines etched around his eyes, hands slightly trembling as he opened the menu. "Order whatever you want," Adam said. "Please." Mr. Reynolds ordered a club sandwich and coffee, while Adam asked for the same, though he wasn't hungry. "So," Adam began once the waitress had left, "what happened? Last I heard, you were still teaching. Inspiring kids like you inspired me." Mr. Reynolds sighed, his hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug the waitress had immediately brought over. "I taught for 35 years, he said. "Retired with a modest pension, nothing extravagant but enough to live on. Then my wife, Elaine, you, Might remember her, she taught chemistry, she got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Adam nodded. He remembered Mrs. Reynolds, a kind woman who had occasionally brought cookies to faculty events. The medical bills came fast, Mr. Reynolds continued. Even with insurance, the experimental treatments, the specialists. I sold our house, then our car, used up all our savings. He paused. She died anyway, 3 years ago. I'm so sorry. Adam said, meaning it. After that, I tried to start over, moved to New York to be near my daughter, but she lost her job during the recession, had to downsize. I couldn't burden her. Then I had a minor stroke last year, couldn't work anymore. The system, it doesn't catch everyone, Adam. The food arrived, and Adam watched as his teacher carefully cut the sandwich into quarters before eating. The same methodical approach he'd had to analyzing poetry. Why didn't you reach out, Adam asked. To former students, to me? Mr. Reynolds looked up, and Adam saw a flash of the proud educator he remembered. Would you have called your former student, someone who made something of himself, and say, I've failed? Would you have asked for a handout from someone whose papers you once graded? The simplicity and honesty of the answer left Adam speechless. In that moment, he realized how little had changed. Mr. Reynolds was still teaching him, still challenging him to think deeper about human nature and dignity. The afternoon stretched on as they talked, catching up on decades of life. Adam shared stories about his career, carefully avoiding any that might seem boastful. Mr. Reynolds spoke of former students he'd kept in touch with, books he'd read recently, borrowed from the public library, his one luxury, and observations on how the city had changed since he'd arrived. What struck Adam most was his former teacher's lack of bitterness. There was resignation, yes, and a quiet sadness, but no anger, no resentment toward the system that had failed him or the circumstances that had led him here. You know, Adam said as they finished their second cups of coffee, I have a guest. House on my property in Los Angeles. Nobody uses it except the occasional relative visiting from out of town. He hesitated, then pressed on. I'd like to offer it to you. No strings attached. Mr. Reynolds stilled, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Adam, I appreciate the gesture, but charity, it's not charity, Adam interrupted. It's an opportunity for both of us. Mr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, a gesture so familiar it transported Adam back to sophomore year English. I've been thinking about writing a memoir, Adam continued, the idea forming as he spoke. About my journey, the people who influenced me. You were a huge part of that. I could use your help, your literary expertise, your memory of those times. Consider it a consulting position. It wasn't entirely untrue. Adam had been approached about a memoir several times, though he'd always declined. But now, the idea had merit beyond just helping his teacher. You want to hire me as an editor? Mr. Reynolds asked, skepticism evident. As a collaborator, Adam clarified, your insight would be invaluable. And yes, it would be a paid position. The guest house would be part of the compensation package. Mr. Reynolds looked down at his weathered hands. I don't need your pity, Adam. This isn't pity, Adam said firmly. This is respect, and maybe a bit of selfishness on my part. I've missed your guidance. He paused. Just think about it. No pressure. As they left the diner, Adam handed Mr. Reynolds a business card with his personal number written on the back. Call me, anytime, even if it's just to talk about books. Walking away was one of the hardest things Adam had done. Every instinct told him to simply put his former teacher in a cab to a hotel to solve the immediate problem. But he understood that dignity was at stake here, and that Mr. Reynolds needed to make his own decision. That night, in his hotel suite, Adam made several calls to his assistant, his lawyer, and finally to a small private investigator firm. He needed to verify Mr. Reynolds' story, not because he doubted it, but because he wanted to understand exactly what had happened and how to best help. 3 days passed before Adam's phone rang with an unknown number. He was on set for a cameo in a friend's film, but he immediately stepped away to take the call. "I've been thinking about your offer," Mr. Reynolds said without preamble. "I have some conditions." Adam smiled to himself. This was the teacher he remembered, principled and direct. "I'm listening," he said. "First, this needs to be legitimate work, real hours, real expectations. Second, it's temporary, 6 months, during which I'll find my own place and get back on my feet. Third, I pay rent for the guest house, even if it's minimal." Adam wanted to protest the third point, but recognized the importance of it to Mr. Reynolds' sense of self. "Those terms are acceptable," he said. "When can you start?" They arranged for Mr. Reynolds to fly to Los Angeles the following week. In the meantime, Adam had his assistant prepare the guest house and set up a small office space where they could work together. He also discreetly arranged for a doctor to be available for a checkup, concerned about Mr. Reynolds' health after learning about his stroke. The investigator's report confirmed everything Mr. Reynolds had shared and filled in some gaps. The medical bills had been astronomical. The pension had been insufficient after years of public education budget cuts. A few missed payments had spiraled into foreclosure. It was a story repeated too often among America's elderly. When Mr. Reynolds arrived at Adam's Bel Air home, the contrast between their circumstances couldn't have been starker. Adam watched his former teacher take in the sprawling property with its manicured gardens and infinity pool overlooking the city. "It's a long way from Manchester High School," Mr. Reynolds observed. "The guest house is this way," Adam said, leading him down a stone path. "It's not fancy, but I think you'll be comfortable." The not-fancy guest house was still more luxurious than anything Mr. Reynolds had experienced in years, with its modern kitchen, spacious bedroom, and small office already stocked with books. "We'll start tomorrow," Adam said. "Take today to settle in, rest from the flight. Anything you need, just ask Maria, my housekeeper, or call me directly." As he turned to leave, Mr. Reynolds called his name. "Adam," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Thank you, not just for this, but for seeing me, truly seeing me when most people look right through people in my situation." It was the closest his proud teacher had come to acknowledging his vulnerability, and Adam felt humbled by the trust it represented. "You saw me first," Adam replied. "When I was just a kid with too much energy and not enough focus. I haven't forgotten that." Over the next few months, a routine developed. 3 mornings a week, Adam and Mr. Reynolds, who had finally agreed to be called Richard outside of their work sessions, would meet in the guest house office to work on the memoir. What had started as a pretext had evolved into a genuine project, with Richard's insightful questions helping Adam reflect on his journey in ways he never had before. Richard had also started volunteering at a local literacy program, teaching adults to read, finding purpose in sharing his lifelong love of literature. His health improved with regular meals and medical care, and the haunted look in his eyes gradually faded. Adam, meanwhile, found himself reconnecting with the joy of learning that Richard had first instilled in him decades ago. Their discussions often veered from the memoir to philosophy, literature, and the human condition. On a warm spring evening, 6 months after their chance encounter in New York, they sat on the patio sharing a bottle of wine. The memoir manuscript lay finished on the table between them. "Your 6 months are up," Adam noted. "Have you thought about what's next?" Richard nodded. "I've been looking at apartments. The literacy program has offered me a part-time paid position. Between that and what I've saved from our project, I can manage something modest." Adam hesitated. "You know, the guest house is still going to be empty most of the time. You could stay," Richard smiled. "I appreciate that, but we both know it's time for me to stand on my own again." He took a sip of wine. "You've given me back more than just financial stability, Adam. You've reminded me that a life's work isn't measured by bank accounts or possessions. Adam thought about the memoir they'd created together, about the raw honesty it contained thanks to Richard's guidance. It was better than anything he could have produced alone. "I'm hosting a small dinner next week," Adam said. "Some industry friends, a few writers I respect. I'd like you to be there to meet them, not as my former teacher, but as my collaborator, my friend." Richard looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd be honored." As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Adam reflected on the strange circularity of life, how a teacher had once given a restless teenager the confidence to pursue his dreams, and how decades later, that same student had been given the opportunity to repay a fraction of that gift. What had begun as an act of charity had transformed into something far more valuable, a renewed friendship, a bridge across different worlds, and a reminder that sometimes the most important lessons come when we least expect them. The memoir would be published the following year to critical acclaim, not for its celebrity revelations, but for its honest exploration of influence, gratitude, and the invisible threads that connect lives across time. And in the acknowledgements, the first name Adam thanked was Richard Reynolds, who taught me to read between the lines of life.